Rumbling is the backbone of bad communication, or at least that's the story. People starting to speak without a clear point in mind have fueled countless awkward conversations, derailed meetings, and made podcasts way longer than they ever needed to be. And in return, they often end up misunderstood, ignored, or just politely nodded at. It'd be silly not to catch yourself doing it at least once in your life, right? Well, that message hasn't exactly been heard loud and clear by everyone. Because if you look around, it seems that we're living through a golden age of rambling. Long-winded emails, unfocused presentations, monologues that start with just a quick thought and end 20 minutes later. There are now probably twice as much words being used to say half as much. And of course, thought leaders, influencers, and your uncle at dinner are all quick to claim they're just being real or authentic or telling a story, but really, it might just be they had no point in mind, no structure, and not enough specificity. Unfortunately, this record-setting rise in communication has made a lot of people very frustrated because all that talking, all those meetings, podcasts, voice notes, webinars, they are being dominated by people who ramble. So instead of being a sign of healthy dialogue, it's actually become a symbol of how much we struggle to communicate clearly. And if you believe the numbers, a recent study by Preply found that the average office worker wastes over 7 hours a week in unproductive meetings. That's nearly a full workday lost just listening to people talk, without a clear point. Another survey from Harvard Business Review reported that 71% of managers said meetings are unproductive and inefficient. So rumbling isn't just an annoying habit, it is an economic drag. Every vague explanation, every meandering story, every just to circle back moment with no real point costs time, focus, and momentum. It's no longer just a personal quirk, it's become a systemic issue. In response, some teams have started setting strict time limits on updates and check-ins. Some even use no-reply email days to reduce overflow, and others like me have decided to talk about it with some details. So when someone starts rumbling, it's usually a pretty clear sign they don't actually know what point they're trying to make. And people tend to go off on tangents when they haven't figured out the core of what they're trying to say. Like if you had a clear takeaway in mind, something sharp, something solid, you'd probably just say that. But if all you've got is a vague cloud of ideas and you're not sure where any of it's going, you end up talking in circle, hoping something lands. Lots of new content creation is also a sign that people have achieved a certain level of expressiveness and feel the need to share new ideas and explore new themes of conversation. Starting a new podcast or writing a book often involves making significant upfront investments, researching interesting topics, living new experiences, and for many speakers, practicing public speaking. Most new business leaders, for example, should also expect to go through a period without having anything particularly spectacular to talk about, while their business develops sustainable deliverables that fuel better pitches and more compelling presentations with real case scenarios. This means that if lots of people are starting to get interested in public speaking and in elevating their charismatic presence, then many of them are likely in a comfortable and ambitious enough position to take on these complexities. And of course, rambling is always a challenge that arises every time you speak, and it's not the same in different settings. You can tell someone is rumbling when they start off saying something is more than a sign, but never quite land on what's supposed to be. Like first, it's about new businesses being a symptom of success, then suddenly they're the engine of success, then it's job creation, then it's productivity, and now we're talking about how people work harder when they're self-employed. Is this about economic impact, human motivation, time management? It's like someone tossing interesting facts into a blender without ever deciding what they're actually trying to make. There's no headline ideas, no through line. And the thing is that every piece might be true, but truth without focus doesn't stick. You end up with a pile of implications and no central message to wrap them around. Rumbling isn't always about going off topic. Sometimes it's just never picking one in the first place. New speakers can also become great speakers because bring in valuable performances to their interactions and better speech to their audience, whether it is regular team meeting, a business pitch, or even a TED Talk. If you start developing your own style with new tones, professional or casual, you will start getting appreciation and build the image you want to project. Of course, AI can help you, with some of the tasks involved in crafting your storytelling style and content, but a big part of it isn't replaceable because you still have to speak your mind and perform as a human with your own voice. Just like in the business world. Of course, most new businesses fail, but for society at large, the few that succeed are usually a good thing. Likewise, most new speakers struggle, but for society at large, the few who succeed often become truly great communicators. So then, what actually makes people ramble? Is it about being a native speaker? Do we need to speak a language natively to communicate clearly? Well, not exactly. There are actually three main reasons for rambling: lack of point, lack of structure, and lack of style. We talked about the lack of point, and I'm going to finish this point with a 2019 paper published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives highlights this exact issue. The absence of a clear objective often leads to misaligned incentives and scattered efforts. Now, moving on to the lack of structure. Now, the missing structure might not sound like a huge problem, and maybe sometimes it isn't, but it doesn't really explain why things keep spinning out of control. And a lot of the time, when people start rambling, it's not because they're lost in thought. There is no clear path to follow in the first place. And that lack of framework, it's probably causing more mess than we actually notice. So it's time to learn how communication works and start structuring your message and better connect with people. So actually, trying to communicate clearly is something even leaders mess up all the time. Structuring a message that lands, that influences, that sticks, that turns out to be really hard. So most of the time they just wing it and hope the message comes through anyway. As tempting as it is to think that good message just needs passion and a loud voice, it's not that simple. The data shows that structured messages are significantly more persuasive and memorable, and in fact, people are up to 40% more likely to take action when there is a clear flow, and like the French say, la forme prime sur le fond, which translates to the form often matters more than the content itself. Like a salesperson, the whole goal is to guide someone from interest to action to close the deal. But if you're rambling, there is no clear path, no real direction, just noise, and in that moment, rambling isn't some quirky charm. It's the thing quietly killing your impact. Historically, the best salespeople and most effective presidents had one thing in common: they could communicate. Let's take Steve Jobs, for example. With his classical presentation style, he followed a simple but powerful structure. He will start with step number one with a story. He'd introduce a challenge or a problem that everyone could relate to, creating instant connection. Then he moves to step number two, which is to introduce the solution. Then he'd reveal his product as the game-changing answer, focusing on how it solved the problem. Then he moves to step number three, to build anticipation, because Steve Jobs would keep the audience hanging, building excitement, and often saving the best feature for the last. Because communication isn't just talking, it's fast, high stakes, and decision making. I invite you to talk a little bit about the outcomes, because the outcomes, they usually match the clarity of the message. Better delivery, better decisions, and better results. In the book Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman, the author of the book, explains that to improve the quality of your decisions, you need to slow down. Now, this idea really just confirms what a lot of us already knew. You can't rush good decisions. Slow thinking is necessary for good judgment. But here's the point. Talking doesn't work at that speed. The speed of thought isn't the same as the speed of speech. While slow thinking might produce better decisions, listeners can't keep up with that pace. And so what happens? You slow down your thinking to increase the quality of your words, but your audience starts losing focus because of the slower pace. And this creates a real challenge, combining slow thinking with fast talking, which feels like a contradiction in terms. Now, keep watching until the end because I'm going to suggest a couple of frameworks that help you combine both strategies. Now, moving from the lack of structure to the lack of style. The lack of style often comes down to a lack of a diversified vocabulary. And studies show that people with a broader vocabulary are better at articulating ideas and connecting with others. According to a 2018 study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, individuals with larger vocabularies tend to perform better in both social and professional settings. But what exactly is style? So style is the way a communicator uses language to express ideas. It is the personality behind the words, the rhythm that makes the message memorable. And why is it necessary? Well, because without style, communication becomes flat and unengaging. It's the difference between simply talking and truly connecting with your audience. So here is something that is not often talked about. If your vocabulary isn't that big, it could actually be making you more likely to buy things on impulse. Yeah, it's true. When you don't have the right words to express what you're thinking or feeling, it can make it harder to really think about your decisions, especially when it comes to emotions, or especially when emotions are involved. So think about it this way. Studies show that people with a larger vocabulary tend to make better decisions. Why? Well, they are able to process information more clearly and keep their emotions in check. And that means they don't get swayed by the first flashy thing they see. And on the flip side of it, if you're someone who struggles to express yourself, you might be more likely to make a quick emotional decision like an impulse purchase. Here is where it gets really interesting. Marketers know this. They know that when you're distracted or overwhelmed, you're less likely to stop and think critically. They're not giving you a 10-page essay to read. They are hitting you with simple, quick messages that push your buttons. So psychology and marketing found that these simple, emotionally charged ads actually work better, especially when people aren't thinking too hard. And here's the thing, it's not about a pair of shoes or the latest gadget. This could be impacting bigger decisions too, like your career, relationships, or even where you invest your money. When you don't have the vocabulary to clearly define what you really want, it's a lot easier to get pulled in by impulses that don't serve you in the long run. We've covered the lack of clear point, structure, and style as reasons behind a speaker's rumbling. But even if you apply your formula with a clear point, a structured message, and concise vocabulary, the receiver might still not get it and find the message unclear. And this happens because we're dealing with a shortening attention span, and people are focusing less and less after being exposed to multiple types of media. Having a short attention span isn't the same as being focused. In fact, we've never been more distracted than we are today. So why is slow thinking important? Because it gives your brain time to do something very essential, to search for the right information, to process it, and choose the best response. This internal work takes time, and that's normal. Think about it. If you give yourself a week to finish a task, it's going to take a week. The key point here is that you don't need to process everything at once. You need to gather that first wave of knowledge, pick just one key idea, and communicate that clearly. Once you've picked that one thing, it will be easier to talk through it thoughtfully, and you will sound way more intentional when you speak. Slow thinking leads to better internal decisions, and that's the kind of thinking that resonates with your audience. If you take the time to gather your thoughts, you will make better selections, and that will leave, a bigger impact on the people you're talking to. And it's about striking the right balance. Get them hooked, but make sure the value is there when you go deeper. Sometimes when you're trying to get a point across, like especially in meetings or videos like this, it helps to have a bit of structure. Not like rigid, formal structure, just enough so you don't lose people halfway through. I'm going to start with suggesting the PR formula. Yeah, it's not public relations. It stands for point and reason. You start with the topic or the idea that you actually want to say, like the core of it. Then you give the reason, the why behind it. Very simple. I'm going to give you an example. I think this whole new business boom is kind of fake because a lot of it's just people moving from city centers to the suburbs. Boom, that's the point. Then we move to the reason. So city foot traffic dropped, rent's too high, so they're setting up where people actually live now. Now, if you want to add a little more flavor, there is the PREP formula, and that's point, reason, example, and point again. You say, the claim or the idea, you explain it with the reason, and follow it with an example, and then bring it back. I'm going to give you an example to that. So the point here is, I think a lot of this new business wave is just moving things around. That's my point. Now, I'm going to give the reason. So the reason is because stores downtown are dying, and people are just reopening the same businesses in the suburbs. Then I'm going to give you an example. So the example is like that one coffee shop on Main Street, gone, but it's in some strip mall near a gym. Point again, I'm going to point again. So yeah, not growth, just a shift. That's the PREP formula. I invite you to practice your own PREP, in the comment section below. Now, we're going to leave the PREP formula there and move to another framework that allows you to give it a little more weight, okay? Like you're leading to somewhere. So in this situation, I'm going to introduce the MAC framework. So MAC, it stands for the main point, analysis, and then consequences, or call to action if you want to ask your audience to take an action. So the main point is, okay, here's the deal. These new businesses, so this is my main point. Now I move to the analysis, the second part of the framework. Most of them aren't new. What is actually happening is that people are either shifting locations or getting pushed into starting something because they run out of options. So that's my analysis after making the point. Now I'm going to jump into the last part of the framework, which is the consequence, or call to action if you need to ask your audience to take action. So the consequence I'm given here is that last part, that's the scary one. That's survival mode, not some cool wave of entrepreneurship. We might be celebrating the wrong thing. Point. That marks the finish of this example of the MAC framework. Again, these are not rules. They are tricks and anchors. Use them when your brain is going, where was I going with this again, when you have cloudy ideas and not clear in your mind. Because if your point is solid, people will get it. But if you package it right, they will remember it. Sun Tzu says, the battle is won before it begins. And that's not just about battles. That's everything. Presentations, interviews, even casual conversations. So what do? You need to stay engaged, not in a 5 hours a night way, more like, keep it close. Keep reading books, articles, listen to a podcast while you're doing dishes, watch YouTube videos in the topic that you desire. Whatever it is, just keep your brain in the game. Because when the moment comes, when someone asks you something or you've got to speak up, you are not digging through a tiny little toolbox hoping there's a screwdriver in there. You have got a lot of stuff going on, full of ideas and phrases and angles. You didn't even realize you remembered. Your words come easier, your thoughts connect better, and you actually feel smart that way. Therefore, subscribing to a channel like mine is very much helpful in that direction. We might not be living in the golden age of expressiveness, but watch this video next to find out why being a charismatic speaker isn't as straightforward as it seems. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep learning with me how communication works.